Mr. Kutcher wanted to divulge it, but I wouldn't let him do it.
Ah, okay. Well, my apologies to the commission. They had closed both lanes of I-55. There was an accident and they were sanding it over.
Really?
So it took me about 30 minutes to go from Robert to I-55.
Yeah.
You don't want to live in Orleans Parish with the rest of these people?
No, I'm
Yeah,
okay.
okay, yeah, right, okay,
That's his story, and he's sticking to it.
right.
Good morning.
Okay.
No, you're just.
All right, are you ready, Phyllis?
Yes,
All
may
right,
I
why
have
don't
your
you
attention? If you've not signed in, please do so at this time and take this opportunity to silence your cell phones. Thank you.
All right, good morning. This meeting of the Louisiana Tax Commission is hereby called to order. This meeting is being held at the offices of the Louisiana Tax Commission at 1051 North 3rd Street, Suite 225, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The date is Wednesday, April 4th, 2018, and the time is 10:05 a.m. Please call the roll.
Chairman Shahardy?
Here.
Commissioner Wagasback?
Here.
Commissioner West? Commissioner Barsher?
Here.
Commissioner Wood?
Here.
5 present and a quorum.
Thank you. There being no old business to take up at this time, I will ask anyone who is planning on testifying this morning as a witness to please come forward and take your oath. If you're going to testify this morning, you have to come forward and take the oath.
Good morning. If you haven't done this before, we swear all the witnesses in together. I'll administer the oath. If you'll approach any of the microphones, affirm the oath by stating I do, and then state your name for the record. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do, Robert Kutcher.
Russell Amaraz, Orleans Parish Assessor's Office. I do.
Ted Bolton, Louisiana Tax Commission, I do.
George Wallace, I do.
Lisa Rochelle, I do.
Monty Gillette, I do.
Debbie Boudreau, I do.
Philip Boudreau, I do.
Daniel Kistler, I do.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. It is the Tax Commission's policy to accept all documents into the record that were timely pre-filed in accordance with the Commission's rules and regulations. This will be done at the conclusion of all hearings on today's docket. Accordingly, there is no need to formally offer or introduce the exhibits into the record during your appeal hearing. However, if you intend to object to the submission of any of the opposing parties' exhibits, you must notify the Commission at the start of your appeal hearing. As a reminder, this is an administrative hearing, and as such, the rules of evidence are relaxed. The Commission is inclined to review and consider all evidence submitted and to accept such evidence into the record. Very quickly, before we get into the appeals this morning, Mr. Alvarez, the appeal on item G, the appeal of 6315 Magazine versus the Orleans Parish Board of Review, docket number 17-22176-013. Has that matter been settled or withdrawn, or is it still live?
We have a verbal settlement agreement with the taxpayer. Assessor Williams was unavailable for us to get a signature for it, but there is an understanding between us and the taxpayer. We're just waiting for a signature to get that document signed to get to the tax commission. We have no objection if the commission would like to hear the appeal. I don't think the taxpayer's here, but we were our two parties were going to settle for staff's appraisal recommendation.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, we can let's, when we get to it, we'll decide what to do. I mean, if you're telling us you have an agreement on it, maybe what we will do is defer it.
Okay.
Until you get that signed. Then when you give us that notice, we can dismiss it, or not dismiss it, but
Okay.
let it languish on the calendar.
Gotcha.
Okay.
No problem. Well, we should be able to get a signed settlement
Okay.
very shortly to the commission.
Okay. All right, very good. The first item on the appeal docket today is the appeal of Robert Kutcher versus the Orleans Parish Board of Review, docket number 17-22172-003. This is a taxpayer appeal, so I'll ask Mr. Kutcher to please go ahead.
Yes, sir, thank you very much. This there are a number of homeowners, myself included, in the Lake Vista area who have had this issue. We're all similarly situated with slightly different stories. It actually goes back to after the close of books in 2016, when the tax assessor unilaterally raised our assessments after the books had been closed and after any appeal period had run. As a matter of law, he was therefore required to file an appeal on our behalf. We all went down to Delgado Community College and had a series of sessions with various representatives of the assessor's office. And that issue was resolved at the Board of Review. The Board of Review actually reduced our assessment took away the increase, reduced it back to what it originally was. And that document is document number 2 in the exhibits I've provided you. The next year, the year that we're contesting, the assessor comes back and says there's no change in the assessment. What he did was took the assessment that he had been rejected by the Board of Review and called that the no change. That, again, filed under appeal, paid under protest, and that's what we're here on today.
So you're here for a 2017 appeal or
I'm here for a 2018
18
appeal.
appeal?
Yes, sir, which is based upon a no change from the prior year, which the Board of Review had reduced. The problem that we've got is that for some reason, part of it is that the assessor seems to believe that those of us who live on Swan Street have a view of the lake. And if you look at my exhibit number 1, the assessor admits that in writing. Your neighborhood whose rear buildings have a direct view of Lake Pontchartrain. We don't. I've been in this house since 1985. I am the first to admit when I moved in 1985, I had a view of the lake. They've built the levee up substantially since then. I have a view of the levee. The foundation of the assessor's determination is false, period. If you look at the photos which I have attached as exhibit number 5, it shows my view of the lake, which is a view of the levee. For some reason, this has been the assessor's contention. And in all candor, I just don't understand it. I received the initial commission, staff commission appraisal, and I received the subsequent staff commission appraisal, the one that was done this past Monday. I have been told, and I have no basis for this, Mr. Alvarez and I discussed settlement, and he told me that they could not settle it because there's a tax commission ruling that allows the assessor to tax properties on Swan Street at $100 a square foot. When I asked him, where is it? Can you tell me what it is? I can look it up. I can't tell you that. It's like double secret probation.
We can't tell you either.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, and so I'm at a loss, and I think my neighbors are at a loss to understand this unilateral raise. I mean, if you look at our exhibit number 4, you'll see the properties. I mean, it's like, I don't know what the assessor is thinking other than, I'm going to raise these people and see who fights me. And so I'm at a loss. I've got no documents from the assessor's office. I have no idea what the assessor's position is, other than we could charge you $100 a square foot, which the tax commission said we could do. And so I'm frankly frustrated, annoyed. This is my 2nd year of this fight, and they just keeps raising the assessment.
We're dealing with value.
Yes, sir. Understood.
Okay. Do you have your own appraisal or?
I will tell you, I mean, I am perfectly willing to live with the subsequent staff appraisal that was done on Monday.
Okay.
But in all candor, I want a ruling from this commission So we're not all doing this next year at the same time. That's my primary concern.
Sure. Okay. All right. Okay.
And if you all have any questions,
Uh,
I'm happy to answer.
No, I mean, you stated that you would be
Yes, sir, I
amenable to
sure
the
would.
staff value that the staff has.
Yeah, I'm not trying to cheat anybody.
I
I just
understand.
hate getting dinged.
No, look, I
know,
understand. I mean,
right.
certainly if property on one side of the street has it can see the lake, property on the other side can't see the lake, that's a difference.
Right. I can't, I mean, my
And
house.
I
you
would
cannot
theoretically
see the
pay you
lake.
more for a view of the
Understood.
lake than I would
Right. Understood.
across the street.
And if we hit the rewind button 30 years, that would be true.
We'd see the lake.
Right, I'd see the lake.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Alvarez?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'd like to clear up a few matters. The Assessor's Office initially valued the property in this neighborhood. It was brought to the Board of Review. Some of the Board of Review properties, taxpayers who went to the Board of Review appealed to the Tax Commission. Tax Commission in docket number 16-22172-050
Say that again, Mr. Alvarez?
16-22172-050 ruled that the neighborhood should be valued at $100 a square foot as far as equity in the neighborhood. So the following year, the Assessor's Office,
That would come about if the assessor's office chose to revalue one property, because we've had some of these, not under your, since you've been testifying, but in past years since I've been here, we've had situations where the assessor's office in New Orleans revalued certain properties, but didn't revalue the other neighbors. In fact, didn't revalue the whole city. That was part of the problem this commission had with the methodology used by the office. I distinctly remember making a ruling, this commission did, where one property in particular, and I'm trying to remember, it was Uptown, I believe, somewhere, where that property was revalued, but none of his neighbors were. And it was an equity argument, is what it was. That his house may have been worth what it was valued at, but he was the only one revalued. Everybody else with similar houses was much lower because his property was revalued, but nobody else was. And it was basically an admission of that by the assessor's office.
Okay.
So I think it's a little bit of a mischaracterization to say that this commission ordered that all property be valued at $100 a square foot.
well, if I may rephrase that, Commissioner,
Okay.
it's not that the Tax Commission ordered us to revalue it. Once they got a ruling, in order to level the playing field, the assessor decided to revalue the entire lake frontage area, Lake Vista, at $100 a square foot. It's not that the commission said, you must do this.
Well-
Once we got the ruling, we wanted to be consistent and just said, all right, everyone will be $100 a square foot.
Well, again, I don't specifically remember that case, but that appeal, but I would say that what you would take from that is that you can't revalue one house or one piece of real estate and not be valuing all the real estate, because that's not equitable. And so that may have been an equity argument in that particular case. That's not necessarily saying that this commission is telling the assessor you have to value it at all the property at $100 a foot. Ultimately, it's up to the assessor to decide. But if you value one house on one standard of valuation, you got to value everybody.
Sure, and I think that's what
You know.
the issue was. Once one
Yep.
property was lowered to $100 a square foot, we just went and did the entire neighborhood. And that's kind of how we got here.
Was that particular ruling on Swan Street?
Yes, sir. It was number 8 Swan Street, I think, or 10. 10 Swan Street.
I actually have it in my car, but I didn't bring it up in the
Well, my point is that may have been, based on what you're describing, that may have been an equity ruling. That does not mean that everybody should be at $100. What that means is that in that particular instance, this property was valued at $150 a square, I'm making up numbers, $150 a square foot,
Sure.
whereas everybody else was at a much lower rate and with comparable properties. So what this commission would have ruled under those facts is you got to be equitable. And the value may have been correct, but all the properties should have been valued on that basis. Not just this one property. So in order to create equity, this commission would have ruled that in an equitable situation, this property should be treated like all the others. That doesn't mean the assessor shouldn't go back the next year and revalue everybody, but the problem is, in Orleans Parish, this is not you, the problem is that that's what happens when you don't revalue the whole the whole parish at one time.
Sure.
You do it in segments, and if I'm in the segment that gets valued first, I'm paying a disproportionate amount of taxes compared to my neighbor who doesn't get revalued until 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. And so and hopefully, based on our communication with the assessor's office, that's going to change for the future. But at least I hope it does. But anyway, I'm sorry. Okay, I got off on a tangent. Go ahead.
No problem.
Go ahead.
I can only apologize to Mr. Kutcher, but it was not I cannot share this with you as private information. I did not physically have it in front of me when you called. I said I can look it up,
Could I
but
have a copy now?
sure. I have to get a copy made, but you can have a copy of this. You can see it right now if you like. So it's not a double secret
Well,
probation
okay.
thing. It's I can't physically put my hands on it, and I need
All
to
right,
get a
let me
copy.
ask this question. Mr. Kutcher said that he would be amenable to the staff appraisal of $900,000. What's the position of the assessor's office on that?
The assessor's office wouldn't have an objection to that. That's a 10% valuation from where we currently stand. I mean,
Mhm.
we would be amenable to settle at the
Okay,
staff value.
okay. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
No, sir.
Okay.
Only that we did not submit any documentation of the property because we were trying to get the property settled, and then there was an issue with a revisement. So our
Yeah.
apologies for not submitting.
That's fine.
it.
That's
May I ask some cross-examination?
You're winning, but go ahead.
I got it. I got
Okay.
it. Do you know whether number 10 Swan Street has a view of the lake or not?
Personally, I do not.
And you don't know, and do you know whether I have a view of the lake or not?
Personally, I do not.
So I just want to make sure you took this ruling on number 10 and said, regardless of whether there's a view of the lake or not, I'm going to use the same square footage. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. I did not do any of that.
With the assessor's
I'm just here
office.
for
The assessor's
to
office.
testify.
Correct?
The assessor's office took every property that fronts the levy
Regardless of whether there was a view of the lake or
and
not.
valued it in the same manner.
Regardless of whether there was a view of the lake or not.
I assume yes. I can only assume.
Okay, thank you.
Just like a courtroom, right?
Almost. As long as the St. Tammany assessor doesn't get up in the middle and start telling everybody what he wants, it's fine.
All right. Ms. Bolton, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your
I
appraisal.
personally inspected this property inside and out. Made, my appraisal was at $900,000. The land value was $562,500, which was uncontested. And the improvement value was $337,500.
Okay. All right. You have a motion? You want me to make the motion, or what would your
I
folks
would,
like to do?
I would move on docket 17-22172-003 that we set the value at $900,000, broken out as land $562,500, improvement value of $337,500, once again for a total of $900,000.
I would second that.
Commissioner Berger?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagasback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood? Yes. Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, lady and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no problem.
All right, the next matter on the docket is the appeal of Monty Shallett versus the Orleans Parish Board of Review, docket number 17-22172-032.
We're gonna settle.
All right.
That's what I thought. That's.
This is a taxpayer appeal. Am I saying your name correctly, Mr. Shallett? Is that correct pronunciation?
Good morning,
morning.
Commissioners. I'm Monty Shallett.
Shallett, okay.
And for the record,
Sorry about that.
show that my name is spelled with one L and two T's,
Okay.
and no E at the end. Thank you for being here for us today. Mr. Alvarez and I are familiar with each other over the years. And I want to follow on to what Mr. Kutcher said. I will say that he and I had not any discussion of how he was going to approach his testimony, nor did I know he was actually coming. So he said a lot of the things that I would have said, and if I can refer you to my documents that I forwarded to the commissioners, it would be helpful. I will try to be as brief as I can, but unfortunately, this, as Mr. Kutcher said, has been going on now for close to 3 years, and this is at least the 10th formal meeting I've had about this property over this exact same increase in assessment. There's been a lot of confusion about this, and I learned some things a minute ago that I didn't know, that I also am curious to see the tax commission ruling that Mr. Alvarez referred to. I'm not sure that it's particularly important, but not knowing what it says would be helpful. So it's helpful to have known. I approach this from a taxpayer who, in looking at his assessment, think he understands what it says. I'm a retired certified professional landman in the oil and gas business, so I know my way around documents and square footage and valuations, but I'm not an assessor, and I'm not an appraiser, and I'm not an attorney. So with that being said, it looks to me and it feels to me as though the approach to this, as Mr. Kutcher said, has been highly irregular. And my understanding of assessments and appraisals is that they're to be done in a uniform manner, that it has to be done with respect to, and I will refer you to your document, excuse me, Exhibit D, which is a map. Map showing the assessment area. That assessment area has been referred to by the assessor, and I refer to the appellee as the assessor.
Do you have a copy of that map, sir?
I furnished it to you as part of your exhibits. Certainly is. Let me give you this. I have a copy here. So it's basically the residential assessment district map from the assessor's website, and it shows on the front of it Here's a copy for the assessor. It shows the properties referred to in the assessor's letter that I refer to as Exhibit A in your documents, which I think Mr. Kutcher referred to as Exhibit 1 in his, where the assessor says that the understanding that I have is that the properties situated along the lakefront were to be assessed at $100 a square foot for improvements. And this exhibit that I show you that Mr. Alvarez has now shows in X's and O's the properties along the lakefront specifically referred to in the assessor's Exhibit A letter, saying properties on Oriole, Turn, and Swan Street were to be appraised at a higher value because they had a superior view. However, if you refer to Exhibit D, you will note that the circles are properties that are situated in such a way as to have a view of the lake that were not raised. These were not treated in a uniform way. And so it calls to question that if the document that the assessor has offered, which he has backed up with the revenue, well, not revenue ruling, but the ruling from this body, that it's supposed to be appraised at $100, improvements are supposed to be appraised at $100 a square foot. Why didn't he treat those properties on Oriole Street? Not a single property there was increased.
And just so you understand, when we rule, it's on an individual property.
I understand.
And that basis may be valuation, equity, et cetera. We don't dictate a ruling on an entire neighborhood. Now, obviously, that's where you're going, but I guess what you're trying to say without implying is that maybe there was some kind of retaliation against the commission?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that if a taxpayer is to assume that the Louisiana Tax Commission is overseeing appeals such as mine, that those appeals have to be consistent with the rulings of the Tax Commission and the law itself. Or maybe I'm wrong. I've never actually appeared before this body.
And when we consider your appeal, we're not going to be considering any previous appeals unless it deals with your individual property in the past, so.
I'm sorry, maybe I misstated something. Your
I guess
question-
what we're going to rule on the merits of your individual property's situation
Okay.
based on its appraisal, the evidence that you give us, where staff gives us, what the assessor gives us. So really, previous rulings within that neighborhood generally are not considered.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll leave out the previous rulings about this
Yeah.
and leave out.
So I guess what I'm trying to cut to the chase is we're not considering any previous rulings. Maybe the assessor did, but that's not where we're going.
I'm
That's not
talking
what we're
about-
going to do.
Okay.
But I appreciate your information about, is it Oriole has a view,
No.
or the same type of view, but no adjustment was made to any of those houses on Oriole Street?
Does Oriole
circles.
have a lake view, or do they have a levee view? Do you know?
Okay. As far as I know, none of these homes have a lake view at all
Because the levy was raised.
because the levee was raised.
Okay.
Similarly, I'm not certain as to how they were appraised or not appraised. What I can tell you is that in a careful review of all of the assessments, as reported by the assessor's website, only the properties shown that are on that exhibit were raised. 18 properties were raised. Some 36 properties theoretically were to have been raised, and as I understood the testimony as I was sitting here in the hearing room, they were to be treated or were going to be treated that way, but I'm just pointing out they were not treated. So we can move on from that point.
All right.
The other point that was made earlier, and I don't want to belabor it too much, is that in 2016, after the close of the rolls, these 18 properties were notified that an appeal had been filed for our benefit. Out of an abundance of caution, the assessor. The point is that in your rulings or in the law, it says that the timing for when these things are to be done has to be within 30 days. 30 days of the close of the period within which the taxpayer can have a review. Is that more or less correct?
Repeat yourself?
Okay, the question I have is whether or not an assessor can file a STR or supplemental tax roll on the last day that the rolls are open, or whether he's bound
Well,
by.
if he does that, he would have to give proper notice, allow people to come in and review, those
Reopen the
changes.
books. Reopen the books, right?
Basically reopen the books, at least to the extent of that,
And in
that
2000.
supplemental
and in
roll,
2006
which may cause a second Board of Review to be held, and then reignite the appeal process to the tax commission if appropriate.
And so
if
for
needed.
that's what happened to me and to others here today, is that one day before the rolls are to be, one day before the expiration of the review period, the STR 16 was filed. And, there's a lot of data here. I apologize. It's not that I wanted to make it complicated. It's that it's complicated because of the machinations of what's been going on with the assessor's
All right,
office
well-
itself.
We're here, so tell us what you believe the value should be.
My understanding
why?
is that in 2000, again, now referring to my very complicated exhibit, B, which I hope you got. There'll be. Well, since Mr. Alvarez does not appear to
Don't
have B.
have B.
Here's B.
Let's see.
I'm just going to show you. B is very complicated. And B reflects, over time, everything that's happened to my property over a period from tax year 2016, the yellow cell C on the left side, all the way till today, O, the blue cell on the right. Clearly, there's been a lot of stuff going on, and it's very difficult for a taxpayer, and you all are more or less professionals in this. So you can imagine how difficult it is for a regular person. You can have it. Today, on the far right, we're at the appraised value according to the Louisiana Tax Commission, Mr. Bolton, at $1,170,000. On the far left, in 2016, you can see in the blue there, it says July 9, 2015, the appraised value was $963,000. If I look from that point to this point, I would not argue with that.
What value are you asking us for?
I was asking for $1,052,000, which is shown, $1,059,000, which is shown in the blue cell just to the, right next to the other blue cell, column P,
And
which is.
how do you base that value request? What are the,
Well,
you got
that-
an appraisal, do you have comparables? How do you base that?
No, I base that on the fact that when all this started, my property value had already been raised 2 times in 1 year from $844,000 to $1,059,000. And then this cascade, starting with the assessor's letter saying out of an abundance of caution, he'd filed an appeal on our behalf, on behalf of the 18 homeowners who did get their increases. And I didn't even know what the appeal was about. So I just feel that the Louisiana Tax Commission oversees appraisers across the state to ensure that they abide by common sense procedures, that it's done uniformly and done fairly, and that it's not cherry picking one house versus another house. So I would ask this.
Let me stop you right there. So technically, you were okay with the reappraisal in 16?
Yes. Yes, I was. And incidentally, sometimes the taxpayer is not able to actually, within the open roll period to get in and plead his case. And I was similar situated, and so I didn't, so I'm okay with it. I live by the rules. I just ask that if there are rules, that we abide by the rules. And I want the commissioners to know that I, among others, feel like the rules are hard to understand. And to the extent that I do understand them, and I have read some of the law, I am very much perplexed by how we got here today, which has been echoed by one of the other folks that we've heard this morning. So I know that your time is valuable. I appreciate very much what you do. I will offer one other item, if it's permitted, that when this all started, the basis for how we got here today was a letter sent to me regarding my home. I have copies for the commissioners. I did not include it because at the time I didn't think I was going to be going there. And it was purported to be the basis for the original STR 17, I should say. At that time, and I will just quote it, it says, during a recent review of our tax rolls, we determined that the assessment value on our 2016 and 17 tax rolls at the location referenced above was not correctly assessed based on the square footage of your property, and also for the area. This square footage error was pointed out to our office by a property owner who resides within your neighborhood, and this letter is written to give you notice that the 2017 tax assessment on your property has been corrected. Consequently, my office has added the tax assessment to the existing 2017 supplemental tax assessment rolls pursuant to 47-1966. He goes on to say that in the abundance of caution and to protect your appeal right, we have submitted a formal appeal to the Board of Review on your behalf. If anyone wants these documents, I can leave them with the clerk or whatever. If not, I just want to close on the fact that over the period, and that's dated September 13, 2016, almost 2 years ago, we've been in and out of hearings ever since then. And we're
Mr.
discovering...
Alvarez, is it the assessor's policy when something like that happens to file an appeal on the taxpayer's behalf?
Yes, sir. It was out of an abundance of caution because we felt that the taxpayers should not lose their rights to protest their value. If they couldn't get in during the open roll period, they would have the Board of Review. And if the Board of Review period, somehow they would miss that, then they would be able to come before the commission to at least one of the three stages plead their case and have to be able to exercise their rights. We didn't want to change the value and not file an appeal on their behalf, and for whatever reason they not have the ability to go to the Board of Review because they didn't get an application in.
What is the policy? When does that clock start running? Are we talking if it's a day? Is it 2 days? Is it 5 days? What is it?
I'm not sure of the actual policy completely, the deadlines and timelines. I just know that the assessor did not want the taxpayers to miss out on the chance to go to the Board of Review, so we filed an appeal on their behalf. That's all I know.
Are you aware of that happening before in other neighborhoods, or was this special to this neighborhood?
This was the only case that, to my knowledge, that this happened.
I spent 34 years in the assessor's office. I never heard of an assessor filing an appeal on behalf of a taxpayer. I mean, I don't even know if there's anything in the law that lets that happen.
Yeah, I'd like the council to maybe research
Yeah.
that
Well,
after this.
based on his, basically the expression on their faces, I don't think they know of any, I mean,
I know it's a very odd situation.
So just so I understand what happened, it sounds like a supplemental roll was filed increasing the values on that particular street or in that particular neighborhood. On the last day, books were to be open. So in abundance of caution, the assessor said, I'm gonna file an appeal on behalf of the taxpayers. So that allows another 30 days, or allows an extension of time to go in front of the Board of Review.
Because
I'm
they-
assuming that's what happened.
Because they
Yes.
weren't going
And-
to give the 30 days, is that right?
Well, they may
just
not have
closed
time
the
to come
roll?
and see us depending on
And
when
that
they got that
supplemental
letter.
roll was filed because of a ruling on one particular neighbor in the neighborhood on 2016 roll.
Now, does that happen twice or once?
This happened once.
This
So
once.
the,
was there a separate Board of Review called for
There
this?
there was not, sir. So I know
Separate
that
board of
the,
review?
we initially revalued the property, did a supplemental tax roll, then found out that there was a square footage discrepancy with Mr. Shalet's property, and during the board of review, Mr. Keith Levine offered a reduction in value from our original $1.36 million value to the 1.231 where it currently stands due to that square footage adjustment. So I know that Mr. Shalet did speak to someone during the board of review period.
Okay, well, this spreadsheet, and I know this is taxpayer information, may or may not be correct, but it shows a supplemental tax roll for 16 and 17. That's why I asked the question, it happened once or twice.
Yeah, I don't believe it happened once or twice. I know that there was a manual adjustment done in 16, and then there was a supplemental tax roll done in 17.
Okay, maybe that's the error then.
Do you have neighbors measuring your house? So
Pardon me?
do you have neighbors measuring your house?
Neighbors?
Yeah, how did this square
First of
footage
all,
area evolve?
Let me speak to something that Mr. Alvarez said, a couple of things. One is, this letter was sent to every person on that Exhibit D. They all were given the same letter saying that the square footage of their house was mistakenly something or other, which everybody said, how is that possible? How would anybody know what the square footage of my house is? Then if I refer you to Exhibit A, the same assessor said that the reason that the same STR, and I think it's 17, was increased was because of a view of the lake. So we now have two reasons that the original STR, which was literally in the dead of night, one day before the close of rolls, no time to do anything at all.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's how we're here today, and that's why I think one of the other appellants said, we're looking for a ruling or something from this commission that says, you know, you can't do some things that you think you can do. I can actually cite some of the rulings here. One of the things it says, and I'll refer this commission to RS 47/1987. Time when listing a property concluded, B sub 3 sub B states, quote, the assessment valuation provided to the taxpayer may be changed to reflect an increase in assessment, including supplemental assessments pursuant to RS 47/1966, comma, if the assessor shows that the taxpayer received written notice of such change at least 30 days before the last day for review by the appropriate board of review, period. Now, I comment as clearly that is intended to protect the taxpayer from circumstances such as the one we're discussing, regardless of how you parse the words. I was only given one business day to respond, and had my neighbors not been given similar letters, I wouldn't have been able to defer the appeal hearing as I did. All of this is most irregular.
Well, you're here, okay? On an appeal.
That was 2 years ago now.
Yeah, on an appeal filed by the assessor on your behalf. So. I
Not
mean,
exactly. No, I'm sorry.
Well, that's what
Mr.
was said
Chairman,
earlier, with nobody
Let me.
corrected that.
Let me,
My bottom line is, you're here, okay? So let's focus on the value.
Okay.
All right. So you are requesting a value of
$1,052,000.
$1,052,000. On this spreadsheet, it shows a value in 2016 of $1,059,000. I guess
You're
probably-
right. Maybe
probably
it's a
would-
million. I'm sorry. You're correct. It's $1,059,000.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yes,
I just want to, sometimes on these forms,
And that was the value that the board of review, at the board of review hearing set. Is that correct?
right.
No, sir. The
It's
board of
not?
review upheld our value of $1,231,400.
No, I'm talking about in 16.
16,
17.
I don't have that
No, Commissioner's
information
right.
in front of me.
I have copies of all these documents with me.
Our records show it was upheld, so,
There's one other thing.
why did it increase, Mr. Alvarez, from that year forward?
It increased in, I'm not sure about, in 17, it did not increase. There was a border review valuation of $1,052,500 in 17. In 18, it increased with the supplemental tax roll. That's the only increase that I know of.
Okay.
Um,
When I said 17, I should have said 18.
Can I
I always
refer-
forget Orleans is different here.
Okay.
18.
So we initially valued the property, and then in order to be equitable, we went ahead and revalued every property that fronts on the lake at $100 a square foot. Filed supplemental tax reviews for the taxpayers in question so they wouldn't lose their opportunity to appeal. And then decided we'd figure out what happens when everything happens. Taxpayers went to the board of review. Some people appealed to the tax commission, some people did not. That's currently where we stand. We initially reached out to the taxpayer.
So how
And
many did y'all file on behalf of the taxpayer? 17?
we filed, I don't know the exact number, but every one that has lake frontage. I know that
I just read 17 somewhere, or 17, I don't know.
I think it may be, I don't know the official count. But everyone that fronted on the lake, we filed an appeal on their behalf as a supplemental tax roll in order to value the buildings at $100 a square foot and give the taxpayers the ability to appeal if they so chose, so that they would not lose out on their appeal rights. And that's pretty much how we got to where we are. I know the letter states that everybody's talking about Lakeview, Lakeview, Lakeview. The actual letter states that their lake frontage with the rear buildings on the property having a direct view of the lake. That was a catch-all letter. The assessor is not stating that every single property has a view of the lake. We're stating that the property has lake frontage, that it fronts on the levee, and that the assessor would be able to provide documentation supporting that properties on lake frontage sell for a significantly different amount than properties that are not on the lake frontage. We did not provide this information to the tax commission because as of yesterday morning, I was still under the impression that we were settling this matter, just like I was under the impression that we were settling Mr. Kutcher's appeal, and we were not informed that they were not agreeing to the settlement that we proposed until it was too late for us to submit documentation to the council. To the commission. I reached out to Mr. Shalit and offered to settle for the commission staff appraisal value of $1.1 million, and he was amenable to that, said he would get back with me. Did not get back with me until I actually called him yesterday afternoon, at which point we would not be able to submit documentation because it was too late. We do have documentation in our file in our office that shows that properties that front on the levee sell significantly higher than properties that do not front on the levee.
Do you have a copy of the letter? Are we talking about the letter that was February 2nd, 2018? And there's an Exhibit A that goes, it's to another taxpayer, and I'm just wondering if this is the letter you're saying went to everybody. Because in this letter that I'm looking at, if this is the one that went to everybody, it says view of the lake. It's not talking, it's not referring to a levee, it's not referring to lakefront, it's saying view of the lake, and I think that may be where some of this is coming from, because if this letter went out,
You can have this one.
yeah, this is what it says. It says that, and you can correct me if this didn't go to, if this isn't the form letter you're talking about, that they sell for substantial more than those on the opposite side of the street without a view of the lake. Now that may have, and that should have gone to y'all because this is one of the exhibits.
It should have. I'd like to correct
We
something
did
that
not actually receive
Mr.
it.
Alvarez said.
Okay.
The first contact I had from Mr. Alvarez was in the morning on Monday. I did not say I was amenable to it. I said I would call him back later in the day. I did call him back the following morning, left a message on his voicemail. He called me again at 3:40 yesterday. Again, I reached voicemail and said I had already replied in the morning that apologized I wasn't able to get back to you that day, but that I was not going to agree to that price, and I wanted to go. I said I want to go to the hearing.
You wanted a ruling, is what you wanted.
Yes, I wanted to-
Something
I
kind
wanted
of
to-
protect you going forward.
I wanted to air out some of the things that
Understood.
I've had a chance to chew on for a
We
long
hear you
time.
loud, we hear you loud and clear.
And you're entitled to that. The Orleans Parish Assessor is very good about coming to settlements in many of the cases, and we do appreciate that. But you're entitled not to accept
And
the
one other
settlement. You're
correction,
entitled to come
please,
here.
Commissioner Wood. There's been some confusion about STR 16, 17, BOR 17 and 18, and I can't apologize because it's not my making. However, there's been a statement that needs to be understood by this commission. If I refer you to Exhibit C, that is the notice of assessment for 2018. And on it in red, I have noticed that this document incorrectly reflects the prior year assessment.
It's not the prior year assessment, it's the prior evaluation. It is actually correct.
The BOR had corrected that number to the red numbers I show. So I can't really address what Mr. Alvarez has said because I don't know whether what he said is correct or what a common sense person would think is correct.
All right, let's hear from staff appraiser.
I personally inspected this property inside and out, measured it. I had got,
Can
20
you
million-
pull a little bit closer to the microphone, please?
I appraised it for $1,170,000. That's 5% within 5% of what the board review number is.
Can you go through your comps and kind of give us because it is a valuation hearing, and as I appreciate what the taxpayer is saying, yeah, he wants to know that the value that we're gonna determine today is gonna stick, number one, and that it's real close to being correct.
I went, my comp one is number 4 Flamingo, which does not look at the lake. Okay?
Now,
No
this
view.
property is on the levee side of the street,
Which one?
the subject property?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The back door looks at the levee.
The back door looks at the
Well,
levee,
it actually used to be the front, but yes. Back door looks at the levee.
but it's
On the,
on the side of the street closest to the lake.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Flamingo Street sold for $1 million. It's 5,858 square feet. My problem is there's only 3 sales within the neighborhood area that are over 4,000 square feet, so we were kind of stuck with what we had. Okay. Number 7 Bluebird Street sold for $1,075,000.
That's correct.
And comp 3 was on Heron Street, and it sold for $889,000. Now, comp 1 and 2 were in excellent condition. Comp 3 was in very good condition.
Did you make adjustments for the fact that the subject property is on the lake side of Swan?
No, sir.
Wouldn't that seem to be
Well, I
an
didn't
adjustment?
have any basis for it. My land sales were like $25 a square foot for the sites. On all of them. The ones we're talking about and the comparable.
And you did a lot,
They were all $25 a square foot.
but you did not, did you do a land
No, sir.
sales comparison?
No, sir. It was, the land values were uncontested on all of these on Swan.
And those land values were increased by, I think it's STR 16 from $18.75 to $25 across the entire assessment area. So we'll never have an argument unfortunately, where it was uniform. It wasn't, it was uniform across the neighborhood.
So, Mr. Bolden, actually, I mean, it appears to me the comps that you use are very good comps as far as there are minimal adjustments in relation to the subject property. I'd ask the taxpayer, do you have any argument with any of the comps that he used in his
No,
in
I
his
don't.
appraisal?
I thought it was reasonable. I didn't have any.
Do you have some termite damage?
I do.
Okay, I didn't hear any testimony concerning that.
Well, yeah, I did point out in my
You can just be
sorry,
brief.
in the exhibits, that my house is not comparable to some new construction. My house is an original house, 1957, and has termite damage. All the kitchens, all the bathrooms are all original. The only thing that's really new is the air conditioning system after Katrina. It's good condition, it's good original construction, but it's certainly not a modern house, doesn't have modern amenities. And there's also a lot of substantial costly deferred maintenance items that unfortunately will affect the value of the house that would not be normally revealed in a cursory, and I won't say Mr. Bolden did a cursory inspection. Those things do affect the value.
I'm not sure our staff appraisal was aware. Were you aware of any potential termite damage and deferred maintenance?
No, I was
Okay.
not.
Okay.
Did you do an interior inspection?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay.
Do you have
It
any
had the oldest
documents?
cooktop I've ever seen.
The what?
Had the oldest cooktop in the kitchen I have ever seen.
Well, so no improvements, you didn't see any remodeling or anything?
Do you have any documentation as to the termite damage?
Just come over and I'll show you something.
I mean, like a contractor estimate for remediation or photo documentation that was not supplied?
You mean today, right now?
Yeah, or at any time.
Okay.
Well, certainly, yeah.
Okay.
I've been fighting termites forever. I used up my $25,000.
I know, but what I'm just saying is there's been no documentation as far as termite damage supplied to our office or in any of the exhibits.
I'm glad the commissioner mentioned it. I didn't know that was material. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just asking if he had any documentation. There's been no documentation as far as contract estimates for mediation, photo documentation as far as termite damage that has ever been supplied to the assessor's office. Okay.
70, 50, good. Need 250.
No,
Mm-mm.
350.
Okay.
750. We're doing 750.
750 and 350? Yeah. you want to do that? Yeah. All right, based on the testimony presented, I want to make a slight adjustment to our staff appraisal. I think our staff appraisal is lying, but given the benefit of the deferred maintenance testimony that was given, we're going to go with a land valuation of $750,000, improvements valuation of $350,000 for $1,100,000 total.
I'd second that.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood? Commissioner
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the appeal docket is the appeal of John P. Boudreau versus the Orleans Parish Board of Review. Docket number 17-22172-047. Item C on the docket has been settled.
Good morning, thank you. We are also in the same category as the other two previous homeowners. You have in our exhibits those letters from the assessor's office changing the valuations on the deadline, last day of 2016. We then have also included in your documents that the Board of Review, their own Board of Review, reversed that assessment in 2016.
I apologize to interrupt. Is there
sorry.
any way that we can get a copy of the exhibits? We've never received any exhibits from the taxpayer.
All right, we gave all this information to the assessor's office and to your office.
We just gave it to your office.
We
Now
w-
we met. That's where it had to go.
We were not told we had to give it to the New Orleans assessor's office.
In that letter.
In the letter we received from the assessor.
All right, well, let's go ahead with the testimony and,
I'll make it short if I
yeah.
can.
Do
So
you have copies of all of this?
yes, we did.
Can you share that with Mr. Alvarez?
Yes. So the assessment was increased, the value of the property was increased by something north of $200,000 in 2016. From 700, I don't have the number right in front of me, he's got it in his papers. From 718,700 to 978,900 in 2016. The Board of Review met and reversed that and went back down to the 718,000 valuation for
And
the
that was
property.
when?
In 2016, and that's in your exhibits, a
Okay,
letter.
no, well, right here, we have in 2016 a value of 718,700.
Right,
Is that
and
what the
then,
value was?
in that same tax year, we got a notice that they had raised it
Okay,
to 978,900.
Okay.
And then we got another letter from their Board of Review saying they reduced it back down to the original
so the
718.
718,700 is correct for 16?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
In 2017, they then went, instead of using the valuation their board determined of 2016, they went to the previous number of the 978,900. And then again in 2018, and if you look at our amount of property taxes we have paid, they have increased from 2015 from 8,400 to 9,700 to 10,200 to 14,200. So even though their valuations seem to jump one time, the property tax increased every year.
Well, the taxes are a function of the millage.
Okay, so maybe that's the part I don't
We're dealing
understand.
strictly with the value, which is.
Okay, so the valuation changed. We got the letter saying the valuation had to change because there was a square footage error. Then we got another letter saying the valuation changed because we had a lake view, which is not truthful. We have a levee view, and there are exhibits to show you the same thing.
So your home does not back up,
We are on the levee side. Out our back door is the levee.
okay?
We see the levee, we don't see the lake.
Is your home one-story, two-story?
Two-story. Now, if you go upstairs and you stand on a chair, look out the window, you can see over the levee and see the water. The other problem that I have with some inconsistency in the assessor's office is that whereas several homes were raised on one side of the street, two homes actually, one of ours being a next-door neighbor, their taxes were actually decreased. So it appears that there's not a uniform standard being applied, even though some of these homes that had their taxes lowered had new construction, improvements, pools, jacuzzis, outdoor kitchens, and all these other accoutrements, remodeling extensively interior. We have made no improvements to this home except when we repaired the damage from Katrina. We had to fix our roof and some broken windows. So my appeal is that we return back to the Board of Assessment's own valuation that they determined of 718,700 in 2016, and for it to remain that way until such time as it can be allowed to be revalued I believe it's every 4 years or so.
So you're asking for a value of 718,700, is that correct?
Correct.
And how many square feet is your house?
They
$5,820.
The city had
5,800.
calculated at 6,039, but it was remeasured at 558.20.
Who did the measurement?
Mr. Bolton.
Yeah, in your appraisal, you measured the house?
Yes, sir, I
Yeah,
did.
Okay.
Oh, I have his appraisal.
So tell me again why we should return to the $718,000 value? Is that what you?
That was their own
Appraisal?
Board of Review's assessment of our property in 2016. So does that mean they can up the appraisal every year if they wish to and just keep raising it?
They're not supposed to. However, what's the basis for the $718,000? Do you know what the basis of it was, or what value did you ask the Board of Review for?
For the previous years?
Yeah, here's the problem.
Okay.
We're sitting here and we understand what you're saying, but we deal with value.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an appraisal from our staff that says that the value of your home is $978,000, is that
60.
correct? $978,000. The Board of Review 2 years ago put it at, for whatever reason, we don't know why, $718,700. So my question is,
Which was still an increase from the previous 2 years.
well, but it's not an increase. We're concerned about the value. So if someone offered you $718,000 for your home, would you consider that a fair offer for your home? Would you?
I see your point.
I mean, it's like all of us have this fantasy that somebody's gonna come in and offer us the value of our home plus a few zeros on the end.
Right.
Which my wife said if that ever happens, just go ahead and sign and sell.
Mhm.
But it hasn't happened yet. Which actually happened to somebody I know. They knocked on his door and offered him a number that, actually what happened was they said somebody wanted to buy it, talked to his wife, so he came up with this crazy number and offered it to him, and the guy said, yeah, I'll buy it for that crazy number. Anyway.
I haven't had that phone
yeah.
call yet.
Yeah, I know, I haven't had that happen either. I still know the guy, and I'm still mad at him, Joe, so anyway, my point is, we're dealing with value. We don't know what the reason is or what the rationale behind the Board of Review was, whether it was an equity thing or a fairness thing that they ruled upon, or what their basis was. And so I'm trying to reconcile $978,000 versus roughly $718,000. It's a pretty big gap,
Right.
and so.
I would be happy with somewhere in between.
Mr. Alvarez?
So this is the same situation as the prior two. We revalued the property, placed it on for $100 a square foot for improvements, and then submitted a supplemental tax roll to the Board of Review. We did not provide any documentation to the tax commission. I had called Mr. Boudreaux's office before to try to discuss either him withdrawing or trying to reach a settlement, because the tax commission staff appraiser's value was in line with the Board of Review's value, which was in line with our value, so we kind of had a consensus. Hadn't heard back from them. Didn't receive any exhibits. I frankly didn't know that there was going to be a hearing till I walked in and saw it on the agenda. We think that the property is valued appropriately and is in line with every other property that fronts on the lake at $100 a square foot for improvements. And we feel that the tax commission should uphold the BOR's value.
We were not aware of any offer of a settlement or any communication. We had not had that communicate.
Is there a number you folks can agree on?
I was going to offer to settle for the tax commission staff appraiser's value. It's slightly less than our value, but it was something.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Bolton?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you want to tell us about your?
I personally inspected the property inside and out. My value was $960,000. The land value uncontested was 375. Improvements was 585.
Value was 960.
Yes, sir.
I got 978.
978.
Number 8 Swan Street.
Yep, it's 978. I'm sorry, I got the wrong copy.
The land value is 375,000 and the improvement value is 603.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Alvarez, I've been wanting to ask this question now. It's probably my last opportunity. Why in 16 didn't the assessor appeal the Board of Review values?
I have no idea. I would only be able to speculate as
Okay.
to what the assessor would do.
Mr. Alvarez, in the letter that was addressed to Mr. Boudreau, it says that, that y'all's records reflect a living area of 6,039 feet. Was there a problem with the square footage? Because I think what we're hearing is the square footage is actually 5820 instead of 6039. Are you, I know you don't, it's gonna be
Yeah.
hard to answer without you
I
thinking.
don't really know. I can only, I have to go by with what we have in our system. I'm not sure when the measurement of the house took place.
And mistakes happen. I mean, that's,
Sure.
like you said before, y'all correct them when brought to their attention. Do you know if y'all brought that to the assessor's attention, that there was a square footage error on their books?
We were not aware of the error until Mr. Bolton measured it, and so we figured we would be presenting that information today. When we submitted our exhibits, that was in there.
So that's
If
always
the-
something very pertinent to
If
tell the
there's a-
assessor.
Yeah, we apologize for not sending this information to the city.
If,
We just saw the 7 copies needed to go to you, so we scrambled and got that done.
And they probably were emailed, but we just have somebody out and can't confirm it. We would
Regina,
normally
did
ask.
you do the math? Did the square footage result in a lower number?
You have my piece of-
Commissioner Vercher, it would result 957
That's-
for
that's the number I came
582
up
for the building and 375 for the land.
And you would be okay with
You
that?
would okay with that?
Yes, sir, that would be $100 a square foot and equitable with the rest of the neighborhood.
So
And that would be
957.
less than the
Yes, that
LTC
is.
appraisal?
Make the motion.
Correct,
Okay, you're
Okay.
okay with that?
yes.
Okay.
So what are we all okay with?
Adjusting the square footage to
Uh-huh.
they had it calculated at a couple of hundred more feet. It would bring
5820 the square
it would bring it to
footage.
$582,000 for improvements and $375,000 for land, for a total of $957,000.
Is that your motion?
I'm willing to make one if y'all are ready, have we heard all the testimony? Mr. Chairman, you let me know if you're ready, or,
May I ask a question?
yes.
If this motion passes, will I get a refund from my 2018 taxes that I've already paid?
The one you paid under protest?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Sure.
Yes, I mean, that's why you paid them under protest if there's a change.
Okay,
Then-
just wanted to get
yes.
it out there, 'cause I
Yes,
don't know how this
and-
works.
and-
I've never had to do this before.
And I don't know of any problem we've
If
ever
I-
had with, go ahead and,
If I may, once the commission makes a ruling and there's a change order issued, you'd get a new bill and you'd have to go to the Bureau of Treasury on the first floor and then start any kind of refund process with them.
Okay,
does that answer your question?
yes, ma'am, thank you.
So we're saying that we're happy with the a value of 967,000?
57.
57.
57? All right,
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion in the matter of docket number 17-22172-047, John P. Boudreau versus Orleans Parish Board of Review, that the land value be set at $375,000, improvements at $582,000, for a total value of $957,000.
Second.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
It is my understanding that the appeal of, Ms. Alvarez, make sure I say this correctly, the appeal of 6315 Magazine versus the Orleans Parish Board of Review, docket number 17-22176-013 has been settled.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so all parties have agreed, you just haven't gotten the final sign off on the paperwork.
Yes, sir. And we will have final paperwork signed into the commission in the next day or so.
That's fine, okay. All right, thank you very much. Items H and I on the docket have also settled, so we will not be hearing those items today. The next set of appeals are on personal property. We're going to go take a 5-minute break, and we will pick this back up in 5 minutes. All right, the next matter on the docket, the appeal of TBM WC Sabine versus the Sabine Parish Board of Review, docket number 17-22085-001. These are two separate appeals. Actually, item J is the one that I just read. Item K involves the same parties. Do we need to hear those separately, or can we combine them, or what should we do?
I think it'd be best to hear separately.
Separately? Okay.
I concur.
All right, that's fine. I mean, that's good. All right, well, this is a taxpayer appeal, so I'll ask Mr. Kistler to please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Chairman. My name's Daniel Kistler with K. Andrews and Company. I'm here on behalf of the TBM Wildcat Sabine. A lot of familiar faces in the room, and being so, this particular company we've had under appeal in 2015, again in 2016, and this appeal for 2017. So given light of that and of the hour before lunch, I'll be as brief as possible. I did submit some taxpayer exhibits, which I'll refer to, but I'll refrain from reading my exhibits and boring everybody. Just to kind of recap on the pipeline system we're talking about here, TBM Wildcat Sabine owns a pipeline system that's wholly situated within Sabine Parish. It's completely within the parish lines. If you look on Taxpayer Exhibit 1, and I also page numbered the bottom, which would be page 7, that's just a map to show you what we're talking about here. These are gathering gas pipelines that take gas product from the wells that are drilled by the upstream producers and move them just one step closer to the end user, to the downstream section. So this group of pipelines that is owned in the parish take the gas from the wellhead and move it to another pipeline producer, which takes it onto the downstream users. The heart of this area, which as you can see is just to the east of Toledo Bend Reservoir, is situated right in the middle of the Haynesville Shale gas play, which, just to refresh, saw a big increase in activity in 2008. We had gas prices spike up to around $12 an MCF. That was around the time the Haynesville Shale was discovered. And so there was a lot of infrastructure put in place for the anticipation of a lot of drilling and high drilling plans and everything else. One thing that happens with these gas fields in particular is that the production decreases over time from a well. It comes on strong and it starts to deplete over time. What happens, that you hope that happens, is that there's additional wells drilled to sustain that decline curve. You don't want to be declining with all of the wells into a low volume. You have additional wells come on, taking on part of that volume. The Haynesville is a shale gas play. It's a very tight rock formation. It's under a lot of pressure, and so when the wells come online, they come on strong, and they also deplete very, very strong and very, very rapidly. On page 9 of our taxpayer exhibits, I just wanted to reference the gas prices and kind of where we've been in terms of a Henry Hub spot from 2008, when a lot of the assets were put into place and put into service, to where we are now. And it's this decrease in gas price volume pricing that has led to the decrease in drilling and the decrease of volumes over time. What we have here for our appeal is we've centered around the cost approach to value, as we've done in previous years, which is the replacement cost new of a pipeline, less all forms of depreciation, in order to arrive at a fair market value. There are 3 forms of depreciation. One is physical deterioration. It's commonly just called depreciation, but it's actually physical deterioration, functional obsolescence, and economic obsolescence. All these 3 things together are depreciation. On page 11, what we've done in order to determine the fair market value of this pipeline system is to take this methodology and look into generally accepted appraisal practices to find out how to determine. How does the mass of the appraisal world determine the amount of depreciation that should be applied to a pipeline asset? The ASA, which is the American Society of Appraisers, has a book, publication, education that revolves around how to implement the cost approach to value. The very common theme that you see through there is equivalent utility, because in terms of appraisal, you're really not just appraising an asset, you're comparing it to other assets. So the whole premise of economic obsolescence, or the cost approach really, is equivalent utility. It's a simple principle that if you're an investor and you get a chance to buy or invest in a pipeline system that's running at 100% of what it's designed to run, and you have a pipeline system just like it in every physical characteristic that's running at less than what it's designed, you as an investor would anticipate to pay less for the pipeline that's running at lower volumes. That's the equivalent utility argument. And how to determine and quantify what is that financial penalty that the investor would pay for this over that one is the economic obsolescence penalty that we've done in our calculation. What we've done is essentially, and I won't get into it too much in the exhibits, it's the same exhibits we've submitted before and discussed before this commission. It's an economic inutility penalty. It's to take the volumes at a design capacity versus the volumes that you're actually running, apply a cost component factor to that in order to quantify how much economic obsolescence. It's one thing to say economic obsolescence is there, it exists on its face, but how do we actually quantify that difference in price? And
Is it correct to say that it's what you're actually utilizing, or is it more correct to say what you can utilize? In other words, I'll liken it to an office building.
Mhm.
I rent out half of the rentable space. For some reason, I'm really quirky and I don't want to rent out the other half.
Mhm.
It doesn't decrease the value of that office building.
Right.
Because the fact of life is, I could have a 92% occupancy if I would lease out the building. But I just choose not to. So,
yes, and that's a great point. So when we're looking at the actual pipeline and getting the technical specifications, if you want to have an interesting look and a conversation, ask a petroleum engineer what the capacity of a pipeline is, and their head spins. Because, I mean, technically a 16-inch pipeline, at what pressure, how much gas could you put through that? Some would tell you it'd be 1,000 million cubic feet a day. Others would tell you it's 200 million cubic feet a day. So the pipeline that we have here is actually physically capable of producing and transporting a lot more gas than it was designed for, it was rated for, at what pressure. This gets into a heavier scenario when you have liquids, when you have a liquids gas play, because at different pressures you have different liquids contents drop amongst the pipeline. In the case of our subject, the Haynesville Shale, one thing that's been least attractive to investors, it's a very dry gas. It's about 98% methane. It's got some CO2 and some H2S. You knock that out and you have dry gas, as opposed to other gas plays where you have the liquids, which you think of propane, butanes, and everything that you can knock out. So pressure quantification of a capacity is a little bit, I'd say, easier to get to on a pure dry gas play, because you don't have a liquids knockout drop. And so what we look at is what was it designed, not what it's physically capable of, but what was this pipeline system designed and could you put through there now? And so that can be different sets of bottlenecks and interconnects and things like that. However, we've seen that a lot, that we've always used in a profession. I've appraised about $50 billion of midstream assets for IRS, SEC type purposes. And we never take a physical characteristic of a pipeline to say it's capable of producing that. It's really what was it designed and what could it possibly do.
And by designed, you mean engineered?
Correct, to its specific application. So when they put this pipeline system in Sabine Parish, what is it designed to run? What gas were they anticipating to get off this system and designed to run without having to add additional compression? You start adding additional compression, you're able to really produce a whole lot more gas because you're lowering that line pressure.
so when you're considering obsolescence, you're looking at what the pipe is designed to handle versus what you're putting through.
Correct,
But-
really the system. Yeah.
Okay, but is what you're putting through what, I don't know how to say this, you know, you could have a pipe that's designed to handle a mega amount of product going through it,
Mhm.
but you're pumping through 10% of that,
Mhm.
okay? But you still could pump through a lot more.
Correct.
So how does that fit in, and how does that fit into your situation? In other words, if you could pump through all this material through this pipeline, the fact that you're pumping through 10% of that is really, on the surface, is really no never mind. So what? You're just pumping through, you're just utilizing 10% of it.
Mhm.
But you could still use 100% if you chose to.
Well,
So how does that coincide with what you're saying?
so how it coincides is there are factors external to this asset that don't allow us to do 100%. The gas is not there. There are factors external. So anything external to the property is the external obsolescence, the economic obsolescence. Functional is internal. So you have that weight. Is there something functionally designed with this pipeline that doesn't allow you to roll at your 100%? And that would be something that's internal. Anything external that we have it here, we're able to use it. The principle, just to go a little bit deeper than that, is a cost comparison analysis. This is where that exponent comes through. This is why if we say we're running at 10%, our economic obsolescence isn't 10%. It's some factor to that because costs are not linear. A good example I always use is, let's say you had a 400-barrel tank, and that tank was dented in the side, and you weren't able to use the whole tank. You're only able to use 200 barrels of that tank. That would be something functionally wrong with that tank that made it different than other 400-barrel tanks. And so the way to look at that is, okay, what is the cost of a 200-barrel tank? What's your equivalent utility that you're able to use? And so really, what is the cost difference between a 400-barrel tank and a 200-barrel tank? Those costs usually are not linear. You don't see, if it's if it's $10,000 for a 400-barrel tank, then a 200-barrel tank is $5,000. That would be a linear cost extraction. There's some fixed costs, inherent costs. Maybe it's $6,500, maybe it's $7,000. So that cost difference between a 10,000-barrel tank, I'm sorry, a $10,000 400-barrel tank and a 7,200-barrel tank, that cost difference is the exponent in the in-utility penalty. So it really factors in and takes that into consideration.
So it's not just half.
It's not
Or
just that.
50%, 70%, it's
No, sir.
probably something more than that.
That's correct, and that's why in this case, our pipeline system for 2016 was running about 2.5% of its design, and so our economic obsolescence penalty is 90%. It's a 10% factor rather than
And so
being 2%.
why was it running 2.5%?
That's due to the economics. There's not, because of gas prices, kind of the ripple effect. You had the decline in gas prices, which led to the decline in drilling. The plans of drilling all these wells and needing a pipeline system with this size diameter pipeline hasn't come to fruition due to the economics surrounding the Haynesville Shale. And
In
so if
layman's
the,
terms, are you saying that you just don't have the product to run through it?
we don't have the gas to
No
put in the
market.
pipeline.
Are your revenue contracts based on throughput, based on utilization, based on MCF?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so there's no fixed contracts, there's no minimums?
I don't believe so with this system. I don't know exactly for sure. I got into the revenue of the profit loss to see where it is. But typically with large interstate gas transmission companies, you have open season because you're FERC regulated and you have a rate base, and there's take or pay contracts, meaning if I only put 10 MCF a day, but you built that system because you anticipated me putting 50 million a day through, I'm guaranteed to pay you 50 million a day if I use it or don't use it. You typically see that with long haul, large transmission pipelines, larger systems than these. I'd venture to say no, just because of the income that's associated with this. You don't see a flat income statement with positive revenue, even though you have a decrease in volumes.
So you're saying that pipeline, the only reason that the flow is not there is because there's actually, the actual resource is not there?
Correct. There's not the gas to put through because drillers haven't drilled it.
Okay, because drillers haven't drilled.
Mhm.
So how does that impact the value of the pipeline because the drillers haven't drilled?
Well, in terms of if the pipe, so the theory of the economic obsolescence by the in-utility penalty being that cost approach is you have a 16-inch diameter pipeline, but you wouldn't replace that today with a 16-inch diameter pipeline. You're using the cost of maybe a 2 or 4-inch diameter pipeline. And so the in-utility penalty takes into consideration the cost between what you're using and what you're capable of using. So what's typical to happen is looking at, you know, where the production was. And when this was put into place, gas prices were around $8 to $12 an MCF, and now they're down in the 2 to 3, sometimes jumping up to 4 if we get some cold weather. And so there's just not the production to put in. That's a factor that's going to be external to the pipeline. It's also why we see a reappraisal and things like this changing. You know, we'll see here in January 1, 18 and 19, and hopefully that there's changes in the market which cause more drilling or more need for transportation of pipeline. That's kind of another factor that's out there with the liquefaction plants.
So tomorrow, if the demand increased, you could
Well, really,
meet the demand.
it's a supply, and it would take a little bit longer than that. There's just not the supply. But in theory, if the demand
So
increases,
that makes a difference. You said there's not the supply.
well, there's not the supply to come in, no. I mean, it may be, you know, thousands of feet under the ground. There's gas that's out there, but there's not wells being drilled to have that gas flow through. So there's, for the pipeline standpoint, there's no gas supply to put in the pipeline. One is kind of an industry type view, and one is a pipeline type view, if that makes sense. And so, but what we've done is given these factors and given that, what do we do with that? What does that mean? So we go to generally accepted appraisal practices to see how these items are valued and how do we take consideration for an underutilization. How do we quantify that into some form of economic obsolescence after we've taken the cost new of a pipeline system as it sits, a deduction for physical deterioration, physical depreciation, what is the economic penalty? And so given these factors, we go to some authorities to determine how are we going to value that. And that's what we've done in our appraisal and in our opinion of value. As a kind of a quick reference, taxpayer exhibit 2 would be the assessor's valuation for the notice that we received. And then taxpayer exhibit number 15 would be our rendition to Sabine Parish for this pipeline system.
Tell us if you can point out in your exhibits here, exactly what it is you presented the assessor's office with.
Okay, so taxpayer exhibit number 3, which begins on page 15.
All right.
Pages 15 through 24.
Hold on one second, I can't write as
I'm
fast
sorry.
as you talk.
I'm sorry, I'll slow down.
15 through 24.
Pages, yes, sir. Taxpayer exhibit 3 is pages 15 through 24. This is our rendition to Sabine Parish for tax year 2017. And so we provided the assessor with the physical characteristics of the pipeline, along with a quantification for the economic obsolescence consideration that we were asking for. In addition to that rendition form on page 22, we provided with our rendition a copy of the profit and loss statement for 2016. And we also provided on page 23 a copy of the volumes that were reported to the DNR. So this pipeline company reports to the state the volumes that are transported through its pipeline.
And that is where you came up with your obsolescence factor?
Yes, sir. That's where we
of
came up with our
10%?
obsolescence factor. Yes, sir. And so what we've
Did you
done,
provide the actual calculation for the 10%? Of where the 10, exactly arithmetically how you came up with 10%?
that is, and so what it is, it's the actual throughput of 8,735 MCF a day divided by the 395,000 MCF a day. and that comes up to a utilization of 2.21%. So they're only using 2.21%. The volumes are only that. That throughput is
Okay.
2.21% of what it was designed to do.
And how
then
do you get from 2.21 to 10.16%?
this is the cost of capacity exponent, where we take 2.21% raised to a 0.6 exponent factor, and that gets us to 10%. And so that exponent factor, which is a little bit further in the exhibits, that's that cost to capacity relationship that I gave the example of the tanks, that's saying the cost is not linear. If the cost on pipelines was a linear relationship, our economic obsolescence factor would be 2%. The costs are not linear, so we raise that to a 0.6 exponent factor. That gives us the 6%.
And that
10%.
0.6 exponent factor comes from,
That comes from, so commonly accepted appraisal practice, it's called the 6/10 rule. So it's an examination, really in the weeds, of 27 chemical plants by C.H. Chilton. It's also called the Chilton factor.
okay,
And
that's
it-
the word I was waiting to hear.
Yeah, okay, it's a Chilton. So when the tax commission had an economic obsolescence in utility penalty calculation, I believe it was actually a 0.7. So costs were determined to be more linear.
Give me the history on the Chilton factor, because you were
Yes.
actually going one step further that I'd never heard about the actual study
Mhm.
of
So,
the chemical plant.
so the Chilton factor, and it's again generally accepted, commonly used, and things like that. And so C.H. Chilton in the 70s evaluated, I believe, it's 26 chemical plants and other type of heavy machinery, and determined what was the linear cost comparison between different sizes based on their utilization of equipment. And he found that they weren't linear. That just because a 400-barrel tank, it wasn't double the cost of a 200-barrel tank. And so he published his findings in a lot of chemical engineering, cost engineering studies. Since then, there have been subsequent studies of linear relationships between different, and it's usually found to be around 0.6 to 0.7. Seen some pipeline studies that have it at 0.7. That may have been why the commission ended up using 0.7. Again, the higher the exponent, the more linear the cost. And so that's kind of the basis of where the Chilton factor
Okay.
came
Yeah.
from. And then, in addition, what was provided to the assessor on page 25 was just an additional email that we provided, sent to the assessor regarding the fact that TBM has now two entities, a Wildcat and a Lakeside. TBMWC is why that we've split the two assessments. Explained our method of obsolescence, and just asked them if they had any concerns or questions to reach out for us. The following exhibits, as exhibits we've presented here before in previous cases, are just the authority that we use, that we cite for our in-utility penalty calculation. And that's what I have.
Do you feel then that you submitted enough information to the assessor? Did you submit more information this time than the last time you appeared here? Or the same?
No, sir. The only thing that was different that we felt like for their other system that supported this in that email was there was a system very like our pipeline system, which usually doesn't happen, around 45 miles of gas gathering pipeline that this entity actually purchased from Crestwood Midstream, and that's going to be the other appeal. But that purchase price was $500,000, and so we felt like, well, here's an additional piece of information that is supporting some sort of economic obsolescence penalty. But in the case of our work, we perform appraisals on pipelines for very different uses, actual fair market value appraisals that are reviewed by the Big Four accounting firms. I finished up in 2016 a $33 billion acquisition of a C Corp of a MLP partnership on a pipeline that was submitted to IRS and SEC. And this is the information that's used, the utilization, the volumes, and the income statement. What we submitted to the assessors, what is used and reviewed and accepted by those bodies in other appraisal work.
we have any questions? No. Mr. Addington?
Good morning. Yes, it's still morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Brian Eddington on behalf of the Sabine.
Still good morning, about 3.5 minutes.
Sabine Parish Assessor's Office. Unfortunately, Assessor Manasco was unable to be here today. She has a 2-week-old grandchild that has some medical issues. And I think I had just one question, possibly some follow-up from Mr. Kistler, and I'd actually like to pick up on the question that Commissioner Verscher asked you. Setting aside the TBM-LS assessment, on the TBM-WC filing, earlier you stated that these are the same exhibits that we've discussed before that you provided the assessor before. Did you, for tax year 2017, provide anything different to the assessor that you did not in tax years 2015 and 2016?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
All right. All right. You have any testimony, or?
I do not. Like I said, without Assessor Manasco, we're just going to go with the record we have.
What? So we're expected to take what the assessor's office did on face value?
Well, it's entitled to a presumption of correctness, and then, there's
Okay, but there's a 14, what is it, $14 million assessment from the assessor's office and a taxpayer claim of a $2.4 million value.
Correct.
You're not going to offer any testimony to try to refute what the taxpayer's saying?
On their claim of obsolescence?
Yes.
That's correct.
So their obsolescence is correct?
No, that they have.
Okay, but why is it not correct?
Well, Commissioner, this is the 3rd year in a row we've had this particular case with this taxpayer. For tax year 2015, the assessor appealed and went to the district court. The district court held that the taxpayer had provided insufficient information to justify its request for reduction in value for obsolescence. And it did it based upon a fairly robust body of case law addressing pipeline obsolescence.
The taxpayer testified as to what information he provided to the assessor's office.
That's correct.
Based on the information that he testified that he provided, it would seem to justify a very serious consideration for obsolescence.
And again,
Are you saying that he did not provide it?
I'm
Are you
saying-
saying that the assessor ignored it? Or,
No, I'm saying that the information that TBMWC provided to the assessor was insufficient.
okay, and what information was that?
The information they provided was a spreadsheet, which I'm using their documents as they're page numbered. Taxpayer Exhibit 3, page 23, their throughput calculations.
Hold on, which exhibit?
I'm sorry, this is Taxpayer Exhibit 3, page 23.
Page 23, okay. And you don't believe that that is sufficient to consider and to do an inquiry on as with regard to obsolescence?
That is correct, Commissioner.
So what should he have given you that would have made it sufficient?
Listen, that's always the question. An assessor will review anything that a taxpayer chooses to provide them.
I'm just amazed that the assessor's office does not want to give us any information whatsoever to support their value, the $14 million value. I just find that amazing.
Again, Commissioner, if you look at the records, it's very, very clear. She valued the property based upon the information reported by the company, but rejected their request for a 90% reduction in value for obsolescence. Again, this is not a one-off case. This is a case that's been through the courts many, many times.
It's gone through the appellate courts and the Supreme Court's denied writs or heard the
Yes,
case?
yes. On this case, it's going to be argued in the Third Circuit next week. But this precise issue.
Is the tax commission a party to that suit?
I don't believe so. It's an appeal from the tax commission's ruling. The tax commission did file an amicus brief with the court. But there have been many, many other cases that have gone up through the appellate courts, again, involving identical information. And the courts have consistently held that the level of information that TBMWC provided to the assessor is insufficient to prove obsolescence.
Is that what the
I just
ruling
find it
that's
amazing.
attached to this says?
Yes.
I just find it amazing. I mean, if I were the taxpayer, you know, I would be demanding to know what is the information that the assessor wants to justify a request for additional obsolescence, or a request for obsolescence.
You have someone with the assessor's office with you, that's in
I
here?
do. I don't know if she knows. Do you know anything about?
I just want to ask one question. Does your office grant obsolescence?
Yes,
And what information does a taxpayer have to provide to allow you to grant the obsolescence?
I do not know.
Okay, so if you don't know, how would the taxpayer know?
So, no evidence from the assessor to justify the value. When Mr. Birch asked the question, what does the taxpayer need to give you? You don't know, but yet you do grant obsolescence. So is obsolescence granted on a who-you-know basis? Is it granted on willy-nilly? Is it jar jelly beans, and you pick out the right color jelly bean, you get obsolescence? But if you pick out the wrong color, you don't get obsolescence? I mean, I realize your argument is solely that the assessor makes the assessment, and this matter of review, I'd like to ask you, what is our role when the Constitution says we have the right of review? What does that mean?
There's also, a fairly robust body of case law that addresses that the Tax Commission's function is one of review, not assessment. When you get to obsolescence, particularly pipeline obsolescence, there has been a very lengthy line of cases that have addressed this, that first provide that the burden is on the taxpayer. It is always on the taxpayer because, again, we're a self-reporting state to provide sufficient information to support its request for a reduction in value for obsolescence. What you have routinely seen from pipelines, and I'll be candid, this firm is really about the last one that's not providing more information, is you get a spreadsheet with no supporting documentation, no engineering reports, no nothing. Again, just a spreadsheet. And the courts have consistently, and I cite the cases in the brief. There are 5 or 6 of them that have addressed it, that have specifically held that this is insufficient information for a taxpayer to prove a claim of obsolescence. Again, the assessor doesn't know what information the taxpayer has. The assessor doesn't know what information would prove obsolescence in any given case until and unless the company chooses to provide it to them.
That doesn't answer the question. The question is, if our authority is one of review, can this commission ever change a value?
Certainly.
Under what circumstances?
Would you like to use a pipeline obsolescence case?
I'd like to know how Lat 5s are handled. I mean, taxpayers file Lat 5 reports, and they tell you that they have a purchase of equipment in 2013 of $15,000. Based on the discussion that I'm hearing this morning, they haven't submitted anything to say that they didn't purchase $50,000. They just told you about $13,000 or $15,000. Do you require financial statements from the local hardware store to show exactly what their assets are, so that they're audited financial statements that show exactly what the hardware store has, what their assets are, personal property, and that sort of thing? Or do you take it on face value that what they report and was signed, I'm assuming the report, and I believe the reports you signed are under oath, am I correct on that? So that if you're lying, you've got other problems much worse than what amount of property taxes your client might pay. Do you take that on face value from the taxpayer?
Again, Commissioner, with all due respect, you're really kind of comparing apples to oranges.
How is that?
Because what you're attempting to do is draw an analogy to assessment of a hardware store to a request for reduction in value for obsolescence.
But you're still trying to get at value. You're still trying to go to value. Isn't verifying that Lat 5 report is true and correct?
Well,
If you want to, I mean, you ought to.
Commissioner, all I can say is that the courts have repeatedly answered that question in the negative, and that, no, it is not sufficient information.
Well, I'm still
Yeah, I have
mystified
a-
as to what it is a taxpayer needs to provide to the assessor in any circumstance for the assessor to even consider their request for a particular value, whether it's the original cost of the asset, whether it's additional obsolescence, or what have you. I mean, basically what I'm hearing today is that there really is nothing the taxpayer can do to justify a reduction based on obsolescence.
I mean, there's been no testimony to that effect, Commissioner.
Well, that's what I'm hearing. That's basically what I'm
Well,
hearing.
I'm sorry, that's the conclusion you choose to draw, but that's not the testimony
Okay,
today.
so what
The
what
testimony,
should, what should this taxpayer have given the assessor to justify additional obsolescence?
You know, I can't answer that question in the abstract. I don't know their business. I don't know their records. That, again, the burden is on the taxpayer to provide this information.
But the taxpayer
I
doesn't know
can't
what
tell them-
information to provide.
Well, with all due respect, he should know that this information is insufficient, since this is the third year in a row that it has been deemed insufficient by the assessor and upheld by the courts. They chose not to.
I have a question for the tax representative.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kistler, you testified that you gave pages 15 through 24 of Taxpayer Exhibit 3 to the assessor. And what I'm seeing is there's a letter to the assessor about severe underutilization. I'm seeing the forms that you have signed under penalties of filing false reports. Then I'm seeing, after that, a profit and loss to show your
Yes, ma'am.
financial status. And then I'm seeing an R5T sum acquisitions, which is what I think Mr. Eddington said that they had received. And that is something that is filed with the state of Louisiana to show throughput. Is that correct?
Correct, to show, yes. the
And
law.
then you also sent something to Don Rollins that you attached and said, and then there is an email, and the end of the email says, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Were you asked for anything else to prove obsolescence, or were you contacted in any way to try and get more information?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
And I'd like to add, 1 week ago today, we had a very similar situation dealing with a pipeline. We had a taxpayer that had submitted very similar information. I'm gonna talk real vaguely here. Very similar information to an assessor. The assessor challenged the information. They both, though, felt like obsolescence was due. What they were arguing was the amount of obsolescence that should be contributed to the pipeline. I thought that's what we were going to hear today. You know, I may or may not be correct, the information he gave to the assessor to warrant that much obsolescence, but it's obvious from the information in front of me that some form of obsolescence exists and should be verified and approved by the assessor. The amount is what we should be arguing, not if there is any. You're shaking your head, but you disagree. You're saying,
No,
yeah,
I'm
yes?
sorry, was that a question or a comment? I mean, I understand that is your position as a commission member.
With the information in front of me, yes, that's absolutely my opinion and how I feel about it. That's true.
And I'm still at a loss to try to understand what our role is. The right of review without the right to change an incorrect value seems to be a hollow provision in the Constitution. If all we can do is sit up here and say, we have reviewed the value by an assessor, and we have determined, based on evidence submitted, that the value by the assessor is incorrect, and that the value should be changed from what the assessor has to another value, which we feel is correct. But we are the assessment monitors, like that guy on TV, the dental monitor. We've just told the taxpayer, you're paying, your assessment's too high, You're paying too much probably in property taxes. And now that you know about it, you know what we know. But there's nothing else that can be done about it. And that's basically what your argument is.
Commissioner, again, no, it's not. That this case, and again, I have a fairly significant body of jurisprudence to back it up, that specifically states that there is no basis for reversal modification of an assessor's valuation on obsolescence on a pipeline when the only information they have provided is, again, the same information that TBM WC provided to the Sabine Parish Assessor's Office in this case, and also for tax years 2015 and 2016.
Well,
That your
look,
function is to review the sufficiency of the information provided to the assessor. And in this case, the case law makes it real clear that the information provided, I understand, Assessor Verscher, you disagree. But the case law says that this is insufficient information to modify an assessor's valuation. That's our argument, nothing else.
And that's why the assessor did not grant obsolescence, because of the case law?
Because of the insufficiency of the information and the case law validates her position.
So, do we know what was granted? I don't think I've heard what y'all actually did grant. What was the obsolescence that was decided?
I'll be candid, that's unfortunately, like I said, Sister Manasco, her
That's-
grandchild could be here. There was some obsolescence, you should be able to calculate it out. They use the
No,
original
no,
cost
you should be able to
figures.
present
Yeah,
that
no,
evidence.
I would have to say, I would have to agree with Chairman Sharday, is I don't need to calculate that out because I could certainly make a mistake.
A measure of obsolescence was given, and I'll be candid, I don't know what it was.
Do we have an estimate? Was it 10%, 20%,
I-
50? Do you have any idea? Does the assessor's representative have
We
any
can probably
idea, like
ask
a
the-
ballpark?
We can probably ask the taxpayer. Taxpayer probably
Do
would
you know
Yes,
what it
ma'am.
was granted?
Yes, ma'am. It was consistent with previous years at, I believe, 12% for the pipeline and 90% for the out-of-service equipment at one of the plants.
And I do know for a fact that is correct for 15 and 16, so if it was consistent,
That
I
answers the
don't know for
question.
sure. I'm betting it is. I think
Okay.
12% probably. Sounds
well, I
like-
do know that's what you did in the
I
prior
think
years.
those are the numbers from previous years.
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't know why we're here today, because we can't do anything about it. According to the assessor, you know, we can't change the value if we think it's wrong. The assessor's office can't tell us what information the taxpayer needs to submit in order to have a valid consideration of obsolescence. I mean, if I served for 34 years as the assessor in Jefferson Parish. If a taxpayer submitted to me what Mr. Kessler's Kister has submitted to the assessor's office in Sabine, at a minimum, that would have prompted a telephone call from my office to say, come in here and let's talk about this. Why are you asking for so much obsolescence? That would have been my reaction. But anyway, it appears that we have no role in this because we can't change it. So, you know, it's hard to believe. You know. All right, so there is no other testimony from the assessor's office?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you have anything in conclusion you'd like to say?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, I'm going to make a motion that we go ahead and take this matter under advisement. Ask for a second.
Second.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes. All right, the next item on the agenda, on the docket, appeal of TBM LS Sabine versus Sabine Parish Board of Review, docket number 17-22085-002. All right, Mr. Kistler, you go ahead. Testimony.
Thank you. Once again, Daniel Kistler with K. Andrews and Company here on behalf of TBMLS Sabine. Just a quick overview of the assets of what we're talking about here. It's going to be on our taxpayer exhibit 1. Page 7 is a map of this pipeline system. This is very similar to a previous pipeline system constructed around the same time. But it's a pipeline system that wholly resides within Sabine Parish. Once again, gathering gas from the wellhead from producers and taking them downstream where they can be in another pipeline and end up at the end user. So it's about 45 miles of gas gathering pipeline within Sabine Parish. As I mentioned earlier, this pipeline system sits in the same geographic area, so it's at the heart of the Haynesville Shale. The Haynesville Shale, as mentioned earlier, has a significant gas decline. Reduced pricing has led to reduced drilling and reduced volumes coming off the wells. Crestwood Midstream owned this property up until the end of 2016, in which they sold it to TBMLS Sabine for a purchase price of $500,000. It's very comparable in nature to our other pipeline system. Both are about 45 miles of roughly 4 to 16-inch pipeline with a treating capabilities at their plant, and kind of became that TBM was a natural person to perhaps purchase this pipeline, as some of these volumes do feed into TBM Wildcat system. And so it's in their interest to have the pipeline continuing to flow some volumes. What we provided to the
that $500,000, I'm just going by what I read, was the pipeline and facilities is the word you use.
Correct. There are a couple of treating plants that are under an industrial tax exemption, so they're not assessed, they're tax
So
exempt.
included in that 500,000, not just the pipeline, but it's other items that are exempt.
Correct, the land and the treating capabilities
Okay.
and manufacturing plants. And so our client, first of the year notified us that they had purchased this assessment, or this pipeline that's actually under multiple assessments, and asked what we could do, what did we need, what could they give us. We looked at tax commission guidelines, which was, I believe, 1305G, that said pipeline sales properly documented should be considered by the assessor as a fair market value, provided the sale meets all relative tests to being a valid sale. And so we asked for a copy of the PSA, Taxpayer Exhibit 3, which is page 18. This begins our rendition of what we provided to the assessor for the 2017 tax year. We let them know of the purchase. We allocated the purchase price of $500,000 to the pipeline assets as a way to quantify and the economic obsolescence, and included a copy of the PSA and asked them if they had any questions to please reach out to us. That's why Taxpayer Exhibit 3 is pretty long, because it includes what we received regarding
The 500,000, is that the absolute total amount that was received?
No, it ended up being $479,000. There's a negative $21,000 consideration.
Do you have a copy of a closing statement or something to show?
I don't have a copy. I can get that if needed.
Was there any assumption of liabilities associated with that purchase?
They own complete control of the pipeline system, so it would be any of the liabilities that are with that. What those quantified are to be, I do not know. There usually is a booked amount of ARO included with that.
So it was make sure I understand, it was a purchase of a membership interest?
Correct.
So they bought into an LLC for a certain amount. So I guess what I'm struggling with, that doesn't necessarily dictate, when you look at the balance sheet, you've got historical costs, but you also have offsetting liabilities.
Correct. And I do not know what those
I
are.
guess I'm not really, this in my mind from an assessment standpoint, I'm not really sure that purchase of a membership interest is reflective of the fair market value of the asset purchased.
Okay. I know that the membership interest they purchased had a controlling interest of the assets at 100%.
So why would we treat this valuation different from the previous one? You
Well,
looked at replacement cost new, went to the table.
Right.
Gave it the physical depreciation, and you went to an obsolescence
Mhm.
factor.
In a manner of calculating economic obsolescence, and they took over operation at the end of the year. They didn't have the operating statistics by the time I was reporting in terms of what we had seen in the past of the volumes and capacities and everything else that were associated with that. And so they said, you know, if they felt like that was a fair market value, what could we provide? And I said I would send that and make our assessment based upon that.
So you weren't able to get any data associated with utilization or MCF?
Correct, not at that time, no. And so what we had done was we had sent that, and then again with the email that we had submitted to the assessor saying, here's the pipeline. They just bought this towards the end of 2016. I asked for a copy of the PSA. Here's what they gave me. Very comparable. It's the same operating statistics of what we've been debating on. It's in the same geographical area. It's a pipeline system wholly within Sabine Parish. Here's a copy of the PSA. And I was never asked for anything additional regarding that.
Do you have any idea what it was valued at before they purchased it?
The assessment was around $11 million. And that's what the assessment, I believe, for 2017 is. There's no economic obsolescence.
Was this part of
on
the
this.
appeal last year, or was this
No,
separate?
no, sir. No, sir.
So this prior taxpayer, prior owner paid the assessment on the $11 million?
Correct.
And there's no obsolescence being granted, or do you know if there is obsolescence?
There's not. There's no obsolescence being granted from the assessor's office on the assessment.
What exactly did you give in your exhibits?
Yes, sir.
What exhibits did you actually furnish to the assessor's office?
Taxpayer Exhibit 3,
Okay,
which is a copy of our return. Taxpayer Exhibit 4, which is the same email you saw in the previous case. And then
Go ahead and
Oh, sorry.
say what it is, because
Oh, I'm
this
sorry.
it stands on its own.
Yes, ma'am, sorry. Taxpayer Exhibit 4 was a separate email to the assessor notifying them of our rendition, the fact they'll see another TBM entity, but it'll be a different entity, the fact that it was purchased for $500,000, gave its geographical and asset makeup of how many miles and where it was located, similar to the other one, explained which assessments need to be transferred over, and also we had submitted a copy of Exhibit 5, which was a PSA with our return.
and based on your returns that you filed with the assessor's office, if we add all of this up, it would come out to the $500,000 value and 15%, 75,000 of assessment, is that correct?
Correct.
So we're being asked to strictly go by the sales price
Correct.
of the asset, without any independent verification of any cost approach or anything else.
Correct.
So
The
no
arts
no
unit-
financial statements were provided?
No, sir. No, sir.
You testified earlier that there was no throughput or utilization of the pipeline or even utilization?
No,
Do we know capacity or anything?
Yeah, their capacity, it was rated at about 65 million, and had a field engineer conducting that, but I don't have any of the documentation showing that. And so it's actually a higher utilization than our other system.
Well, I gotta say, in this case, you've given the assessor very limited information.
Correct. So what happened is when we're talking with our client, they give us a PSA. They said, we purchased it for $500,000. What can we do? Submit me a copy of the PSA. I'll submit it. We're allowed to submit that in the rules. Ask the assessor for, if they had any questions to let us know. I believe during open records, they had some trouble assessing pipeline properties. It was pushed towards the end of the open records period. We called 10, 12 times. I think there were some flooding issues in the assessor's office. And we called, could not get a return call. And
Did
so
you file an appeal in front of the Board of Review?
we did a file appeal before the Board of Review.
All right.
I would have to say, just this PSA, which is the purchase and sale agreement, you know, sometimes people get good deals and sometimes people get bad deals. So trying to set a value based on the deal and not the replacement cost new, less obsolescence and depreciation.
Right. And our hope was, you know, when the client comes to me with, I bought this for $500,000, it's, okay, well, we're going to report on what you paid for it and what you bought it at $500,000. We got the assessment towards the end of open records, or actually after open records, with no obsolescence, and we tried to reach out to, okay, what do you need? Is there not somewhere?
If you were doing an asset purchase, I'd say that might be reasonable, but you're doing a purchase of a membership interest.
Yes, sir, I understand.
You know, so the financial statement could reflect a whole different picture than the purchase of that membership interest. That's just buying into that LLC.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, I'm not, you know, if I give advice to you, I would get the whole kit and caboodle. If they're buying a membership interest, they definitely have access to the financials. And they certainly did the due diligence to figure out what the utilization was going to be and the throughput for the previous year. So, you know, this gives me a lot of pause. There's not a whole lot to work with here.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Eddington?
I have no questions for Mr. Kistler. I'm going to briefly call one witness, unless there are any questions at this point.
Have any questions?
Okay. I do have Miss Lisa Rochelle. She was previously sworn in. Ms. Rochelle, could you please state your name and current position for the record?
Lisa Rochelle.
Put your microphone a little bit closer.
I apologize.
It's all right.
Lisa Rochelle. I am a deputy assessor.
And you did have an opportunity to review your office's record on the assessment of TBM LS Sabine LLC. Did you not, part of this hearing?
Yes.
Can you tell the commission how the Sabine Parish Assessor's Office went about preparing its assessment of this property?
I do not particularly deal with oil and gas. That is not my field in the office. I do know that every attempt is made across the board, regardless of the assessment, oil and gas, personal property, to be fair and to take into consideration every single aspect of that property or personal property.
And do you know if TBM LS, and I want to be careful because they're two different TBM entities, whether TBM LS's property was valued using the Chapter 13 tables promulgated by this commission?
Yes.
And do you know if, well, let me back up, simple question. There are other pipelines in Sabine Parish, are there not?
Yes.
Do you know if any of those properties are assessed based upon a sales price basis?
Not that I'm aware of.
And are you aware, are there any pipelines in Sabine Parish that are assessed on any basis other than the Chapter 13 tables promulgated by this commission?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. No further questions. Answer any questions the commissioners might have.
Do we have any questions? Mr. Kistler, you have any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I'll go ahead and make the motion that we take this matter under advisement.
Second.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now consider change orders.
Chelsea Soche with the Louisiana Tax Commission Office. We have a total of 1,376 change orders for today's meeting. Staff has reviewed and recommends that the commission approve 1,368 and place 8 under pending status per appraisal department review.
You have a motion?
I would move that we accept the staff recommendations to approve 1,368 and place 8 on pending status.
Second.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes. We'll now consider tax sale cancellations.
We have 18 tax sale cancellations for today's meeting, all for St. Tammany Parish, all dual assessments. Staff has reviewed and recommends that the commission approve all 18 cancellations.
Make a motion, we approve the tax sale cancellations in St. Tammany Parish for the dual assessments as recommended by staff.
Second.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Commissioner West? Chairman Shahardy?
Yes. There being no other matters to come before the commission at this time, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Varsher?
Yes.
Commissioner Wagensback?
Yes.
Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Commissioner West?
Yes.
Chairman Shahardy?
Yes.